everybody has the link. And we know that in today's world, a lot of folks may want to consume conversations after the fact on replay. So I'm going to go ahead and start our recording. Okay, so welcome everyone. I am Kyla Carlson. I'm the Director of Programs with Co.act Detroit. We're very excited to host the part 2 of our series today on stimulus funding for nonprofits. We hosted the first session last Friday on sort of the tactical what stimulus programs are available out there right now for nonprofit organizations. And we're excited to host this in partnership with Michigan Nonprofit Association. If you missed the last session, don't worry, it's recorded and we will reshare the link and the slides. And today we're going to have an engaging dialogue with nonprofit leaders around demystifying the PPP loans and other programs that are available. You can go to the next slide. So here's what to expect today. I'll go over a couple of quick housekeeping items. Then we'll introduce our panelists and get started with the conversation. There will be lots of time for questions and answers. And at the end, we'll share some resources that you can take back with you. So again, as a quick note, this session is being recorded. We have built ample question and answer time into the program, but at any point, if you have a question or any comments or need any support, you can use the chat function to drop your comments there, and our team will help moderate any questions and support. And then just another quick note that, in the current environment, things change very quickly. And so just a disclaimer that the conversation today is based on our best understanding at this time. So without any further delay, I will introduce Allandra Bulger, the Executive Director of Co.act, who will be moderating today's conversation.
Thank you, Kyla, and thank you all for joining us today. It is an honor and a privilege to share the virtual stage with these three amazing women. I'd like to start by introducing Donna Marie Brown, my mentor, colleague, sister friend. Donna is the president and CEO of the Michigan Nonprofit Association, MNA, a charitable organization dedicated to nonprofits in the community they serve by promoting anti-racism and social justice. MNA is a statewide membership organization and achieves its mission through advocacy, training, technology services, and civic engagement. Donna is the driving force behind MNA's strategic direction and operations. Welcome, Donna. Next to Donna is Christy Narayanan. Christy is the president and CEO of the Opportunity Resource Fund, a U.S. Treasury certified CDFI, offering social impact investment opportunities for individuals and corporations throughout Michigan. Opportunity Resource Fund provides small business loans, funds affordable housing development, issues single-family mortgages, and is licensed and regulated as such by the Michigan Department of Finance and Insurance Regulation. Welcome, Christy. And then last and certainly not least, Rhonda Fields. Rhonda is a seasoned advocate in the field of nonprofit and educational social services with the ability to be empathetic, strong-minded, and to work with diverse populations. In her role as the executive director of Girls on the Run of Southeastern Michigan, Rhonda ensures the success of a proven physical activity positive youth development program that encourages girls to make connections and develop their character. The program also supports girls in learning how to care for themselves and others, instilling confidence and competence, and offering opportunities to make a positive contribution to our community. Welcome, Rhonda. Ladies, I want to jump right into the conversation. This last year has been challenging for so many of us, and our communities have been grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic for a little more than a year now. As such, organizations have also had to adapt to these unprecedented challenges during this time. Donna, I'd like to start with you and just, can you share with us, your thinking over the last year and what really stands out for you as you think about how MNA has responded to this crisis and also some of the members that you serve?
Yeah, thank you so much, Allandra. Thanks for having me here too, along with this wonderful panel. It's interesting to just think about it's been a year. April marks the year, April 2nd to be exact, that this program, the Paychex Protection Program, was made available to small businesses and to nonprofits. And one of the things that really sticks out for me is the advocacy that Michigan Nonprofit Association had at both the local level and at the national level to make sure that nonprofits were included in this opportunity for them to continue to do the great work that they do and to keep their teams in place. And I can tell over the last year, just if you went to the SBA, the Small Business Administration's website, and you went to click on PPP or Paychex Protection Program loans, and you will see that there's probably about 3 to 4 iterations of the application itself. And what that represents in my mind is the evolution of thinking about that. When it first rolled out, nonprofits were, they were included. That was a huge step for mankind that they were included, but the language on the application didn't resonate at all for nonprofits. It was asking about owners, who owned the nonprofit. We know that doesn't make any sense, right? We couldn't really understand how to answer that. There was not any demographic information that was collected. So we didn't know from a race and ethnicity perspective, who was able to take advantage of that. Over time, in several iterations, lots of advocacy, lots of nonprofits really advancing their voices. Now, certainly Michigan Nonprofit Association was one who advocated and provided voice to that, but there were so many across the country that now today, if you look at the application, it makes sense for everyone to be able to use that. So that's what my reflection is so far. There's a lot more detail, of course, but I've been thinking about where we were last year, April 2nd, to now. The phrase, of course, I'm a 60s baby and enjoyed the 70s. It's like, we come a long way, baby. And I'm really, really excited about seeing how much advocacy really mattered in making certain that nonprofits had the ability to participate.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your work. I can recall some of our early conversations in April of last year, trying to figure out how to connect nonprofits to this resource. And so to be this far along in the conversation really is a testament to the advocacy of M&A. Rhonda, I wanna direct this question to you. As you think about the last year and just some of the experiences that your organization has had, what have been some of the pain points that you've experienced, and how have you kind of met the moment?
Yeah, I want to echo Donna's comment. Thank you for having me. When I think about this question, I get overwhelmed because we were on track to having one of our best fiscal years. Like, it was something intentional. We put intentional things in place to make sure that we were going to end up in a better position, but who can plan for a pandemic? And we did not plan for a pandemic. We had everything else covered, but not that. And I say that to say we went from quickly having our best fiscal year to our worst fiscal year in a matter of 30 days. In the nature of our program it's an after school program. It's in schools. Schools weren't in session. And so we didn't have the resources that we have now where we could have virtual programming just yet. We had some capabilities, but it just wasn't the same. And our families, we had to give massive amounts of money back. And that's one of the reasons why I called or text Donna crying, like, tell me more about this PPP. How do we get a part of this? And so the pain points was definitely that quick turnaround. My gosh, it was like whiplash. But one of the things, just to go back with, I'm sure every nonprofit could say, is, our staff was resilient. We're kind of running on fumes now, but we were doing anything and everything that we could to see if we could bring money back into the organization as quickly as possible, because we turned 20 this year and we were not going to make it to our 20th anniversary.
Wow. And so many organizations, I commend your team and your staff. So many organizations have had to adjust and adapt during this time. And resilience has kind of been a buzzword that we've heard so much about. But when we think about resiliency, we also think about fiscal sustainability. And Christy, I know that your work has been really centered around connecting nonprofit organizations to opportunities such as the PPP. Can you share a little bit with us about what you're seeing in the landscape as you serve small businesses and nonprofits? From a lender's perspective, why is the PPP and some of these federal programs important during this time?
Thank you, Allandra, and I will echo the comments. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's really a joy to be able to share this great news with everyone. From a lender perspective, the PPPs and the fact that they're open to nonprofit organizations has been amazing. It is literally geared to keep your people paid. And we ourselves took advantage of round 1 and round 2 PPP loans at Opportunity Resource Fund because we're also a nonprofit corporation. So the landscape is such, it is much easier now, as Donna referenced, than it was when we first started this over a year ago. It is much simpler to get a PPP loan approved and to move forward with the process. I will emphasize one thing. We are seeing a slight decrease in applications. And as a lender, that worries me because there were over 284 billion new dollars put into this program. And we're down to about 40 billion, which 40 billion is a big number, but think about that decrease from 284 billion to 40 billion just this year. And so even though the program has been extended to May 31st, we don't really want you to wait that long. I think that would make me very nervous. A lot of lenders are starting to think about when they're going to close their portals so that they can make sure they don't have a backlog. OpFund, for example, will have to stop taking applications on the 17th of May to ensure that we can process everything. But if you can get your application in tomorrow, that's even better. We don't want to say it's all gloom and doom because there is money available, $40 billion. Let's get some of that into our state and into our nonprofits. I think that's super important. And we have people on our team who can help a nonprofit through every step of the way, through all aspects. And so from a lender perspective, I would urge you not to wait. I would urge you to take advantage of this. And I would urge you to get an application in as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Kirsty. Speaking of the application, Rhonda, you mentioned reaching out to Donna to learn a bit more about PPP and then ultimately applying for the resources. Can you share a little bit with us about, how you felt during the process? Were you hesitant about seeking the PPP funds? And if so, what were some of those hesitations that you had to overcome as you move forward with the application?
Yeah, so I first heard about the PPP loan through our national organization, Girls on the Run Nationally, and they kind of put the information out there for councils to decide if it was a good fit. We researched it, and this was, again, back in April, and my gosh, I think and Christy and Donna, you could correct me if I'm wrong, the very first time the portal opened, it might have been like a Monday or something. And we heard about it that the Thursday before, we got all the documents together that Friday, and we were ready to go Monday, right? Like our lender had the stuff. And she submitted it, and we were waiting. We were waiting and waiting. I'm like, what is going on? I had never done anything like this. No one on our board had ever done anything like this. And I have board members who run banks, and I had board members who were accountants, and they were like, we can't tell you we don't know what's going on. Long story short, that very first time that it opened, we did not get a loan. And I was crushed. I was like, this is it. The organization's going under. And then they announced that there was more money coming, I think maybe a week or 2 weeks later. And this is where I started calling. And that's when I texted Donna. I was like, please help me, because we were confused. Our lender was saying, yeah, there's a possibility you could get it, but we're just not sure what's going on. And so I reached out to Donna to just say, what do you think we should do? Should I go somewhere else? We really, really need this money. And so the process, the very first time was, I'll be honest, it was very intense, especially as someone, I like to count myself as good at numbers and budgets, but this was just kind of out of my wheelhouse. This was, and we aren't eligible like for federal funding. So we never really even had to think through like some of these intense applications. And so all that to say, we received the second round of funding, which was great. And later on it got forgiven. And so that was just phenomenal for our board. And we ended up applying for a second PPP loan this year. And so in the process, as Donna had mentioned, I think she was talking about the applications are changing. And I feel like they're adapting to the needs of the community. And this second round, or the second time we received funding, it was so quick. Probably took maybe half an hour. It was that quick. And we got, funding within the week. So highly recommend. And in terms of what does it mean for our organization, honestly, we wouldn't be here. We would not be here if we did not have that funding. But more for me, my staff is all women. And what I did not want to happen was to contribute to the statistic of unemployed women. And so it was I had to get this money. Like I could not be especially be an organization that serves girls, I could not be that person who lets go of more women and contributes to that. So that's the impact it's made on us.
And just wanted to piggyback off of that, Rhonda, as you think about your experience going through the application process, ultimately receiving the loan, the PPP, why should other nonprofit organizations think about this resource as an opportunity for themselves?
Yeah, for us, it was about keeping our doors open. That's number one. We have a mission, right? We have a mission to serve every girl in the community that we're in. How can we do that if our doors are closed? And so it went back to what we were founded on, like, how do we fulfill this mission? That was number one. The second thing is also, you know, we did not want to have any loans. And so that's where I was leading towards before the PPP information came out. And so the fact that this turned into a grant, I was like, oh, this is perfect. And I'm sure they'll talk about it, but, and there's 1%, like, what? This is, okay, let's just make this happen. There's no question about it. So it was that, it was turning into a grant. It was keeping doors open. Those, you know, those were some of the things that we consider. And let me tell you, my board is extremely frugal. You know, shout out to them. You were here for a reason, but they advocated for this, right? Like, that's how I knew it was a good fit for us.
Thank you. And so you've mentioned the evolution of the application. Donna, you've mentioned how things have evolved to be in more alignment, you know, and it's become a bit easier for folks. Still, it's complex, right? Donna, can you share with us from your perspective why you think some organizations haven't sought out PPP?
Yeah, I think there's several reasons. I think a couple things. One, they don't necessarily have the information as to where they can get it except for at their bank. And they may not have a really good relationship with their banker. So it could be very intimidating. So they may not know that there are nonprofit organizations like community development financial institutions that actually understand what it means to be a nonprofit and are available to be able to serve those needs, like with Christy, what she can do and her organization can do. So I think there's a lack of understanding as to the access of this, you know, wonderful opportunity. So I think that's one thing. The other thing too, I think, and I've heard this in the field, that a lot of nonprofits, whether it be the executive director, their senior team, or their boards, they don't necessarily feel like it's proper and in order for a nonprofit organization to either access federal funds or to actually have a loan. And there's this misunderstanding that although it's shaped and formed and like a loan, in this case, if you say that it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it is a duck. Well, kind of. In this, it's actually a grant if you meet the qualifications, and the qualifications are low bars, to reach those things, right? And I think it's the intention, like what Rhonda shared here, is it's about keeping your team together. And if you were to think about it from that viewpoint, keeping your team together, keeping your doors open, thus helping the people that you're trying to serve, it is indeed right in alignment with your mission. And so I think there's this kind of separation of getting these funds, getting a loan perhaps, and how does that really make you an organization that's meeting your mission? And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding there. And then also I think it is whether the application itself has evolved, and thank goodness it has. I think there is some intimidation that is there, and some perceived exclusion, and also some lack of trust about what the federal government might be offering here. And so just the access, the misinformation, the feeling of, also, this has also been something out there, we don't deserve that. We don't really need it. Let's make sure the money is available for other nonprofits who really need it. Now, I heard that, especially the first draw, and that was confusing to me. And I understood it at a certain degree, because it was, well, we may have some reserves. We're doing okay. We don't need to close our doors. But the idea of not understanding how long this pandemic was going to persist, how it was going to impact your ability to raise funds, no one really knew that in April. People thought it was going to be a 90-day, 6 months tops, right? And so here we are today, right? So we consider this post-pandemic, but there's still a raging surge of cases, and still we're not sure. So I think it's really several things, but all of which in my mind are not reasons to not at least explore that. because it is a viable opportunity. And Rhonda is proof of that. And when we think of wanting to keep people paid and employed, and a nonprofit sector representing 1 out of 10 people being employed, we stand to actually have an employment issue if we don't actually take advantage of that.
Absolutely. And so if organizations have, overcome internally some of the barriers that you've laid out, and they're like, okay, I'm ready to go after this, right? Christy, I'm wondering if you can share with us some suggestions on how organizations might verify their eligibility if they are able to take advantage of the opportunity.
Sure, it's actually pretty simple. If your organization was in business in February of 2020, and you have fewer than 500 employees, and you pay those employees as employees, you're eligible. You can apply for up to 2.5 times your monthly payroll costs. You can apply for assistance with rent, utilities, and retirement and health benefits for your team. You do need to make sure that 60% of what you're asking for will go for payroll, because the whole program is designed to protect paychecks, right? I mean, that's kind of where they got that name. Although really, PPP and PPE, I think that's the mantra for us over the last 12 months or so. And there's one additional requirement for round 2. If you're going to do a second draw, you also need to demonstrate that you had a 25% reduction in gross receipts. And that can be 1 quarter over 1 quarter. It doesn't have to be over the entire year. So if you had one particularly bad quarter and you can demonstrate that you had 25% less revenue in 2020 than you did in 2019, you will be eligible for that. And people are worried about how onerous the process will be. It's not really that onerous. If you come in with an application, for example, to OpFund, we'll walk you through every step of the way. And as Rhonda mentioned, it can be as quick as a week. In our case, maybe 2 at the most, just so that we give the SBA time to get those approvals in. So if you want to see if you're eligible, it's very simple. If you are in operation February 15th of 2020, if you have paid employees, not 1099s, if you're covering 2.5 months of your payroll, and you have less than 500 employees, you are eligible. You can still apply for a first draw. And if you've already done that and you had a 25% loss 1 quarter over the other from 2020 and 2019, then you can apply for round 2.
Thank you. I want to open this up to all 3 of you. What would you say to organizations that are concerned about the PPP loan repayment and are really committed to being debt-free? Debt-free is often seen as being fiscally responsible. Rhonda, I want to start with you. Just from the nonprofit perspective, what would you say to other nonprofit leaders who might be apprehensive about taking on a loan?
Yeah, I would echo what Christy said, is work with your lender. That was the most important thing for us. Before we apply, we made sure we hit every single requirement and we double checked our numbers back and forth. We worked with our lender. At one point, she didn't even get on the phone. I was like, look, we're about to go to her house. We need to make sure that this is working out, because we all, we don't want to, we've never taken a loan. And so we didn't want to be in that position. But as long as we knew it was going to get forgiven, and again, it was that relationship with the lender. I just met Christy, during this this panel, but I can already tell, she's gonna walk you through the entire process, right? If not her, her staff member. And so I would totally, I never thought of this as a loan at any point in time, because I knew that it was gonna get forgiven. And if it didn't, we maybe would have owed $100, if that. It wasn't something that we were concerned about, but it did get completely forgiven. Thus, we applied for a second one.
Got it. I'd like to punt that question over to you as well, Donna.
Yeah, what comes to mind immediately for me is that many nonprofits really rely on grants, from the foundations and also from individual giving. And what we really should think about is the federal government, if you compare those just nationally, right? Overall, generally speaking, of course, there are anomalies that are out there. The federal government will always outgive in terms of dollar amounts to a nonprofit. notwithstanding that grants aren't important, notwithstanding that individual giving, because individual giving really is one of the #1 ways that nonprofits actually amass resources for their organization. But in comparison, a large sum of money coming to your organization is hard to come by through those other mechanisms right now. The federal money right now is available, and it is there for you to actually be able to meet your mission. That's what it's there for. It is temporal. This is not going to be forever, right? And so we have to consider that as well. And quite frankly, it's able, if you think about the ecosystem overall, it's able to allow for foundations to be able to do specific giving for things that they care about, which may or may not be your particular mission. But overall, it allows them to have more money to give if they have less to have to do in this emergency situation. So just thinking about that from a macro perspective. And again, your people in your place are the most the largest expenses that you have as an organization. And to be able to cover that, and also some of the monies can be used for rents. We just heard that. That's the most expensive expenses that you have. So this is such a viable tool to be able to get you over. It is a bridge. So think of it that way. And it is almost nearly, I'm not gonna say impossible, but you can almost guarantee that you can think of this as a grant. And in the event that you can't, there is no cheaper money than 1% that I can find, right, out there in the world. And so I think it's for those reasons, I just wanted to lift that up.
Thank you. Chrissy, is there anything that you
cut out right then, but I think you were going to ask me to weigh in on this. So I'll just jump right in.
A bit of a technical glitch. Just wanted to know if there was anything you wanted to add to that.
I just want to strongly reiterate what both Rhonda and Donna have said. Even if your organization is committed to being debt-free, this is a unique circumstance. I mean, how many of us would ever remember the 1918 pandemic? I don't think a lot of us living would remember that. This is a very, very unique time in our history, and nonprofits have been adversely impacted even more so than other small businesses. And we're already vulnerable organizations because we do rely so heavily on donations and public grants. And we know that in this pandemic time, a large majority of grants were diverted for frontline COVID responses. So there's no shame in availing yourself of something that is designed for this hopefully once in our lifetime tragedy. And as Donna also mentioned, if you do, and I don't recommend this, but if you did use the money for something other than what you said you were, the payroll, the rent, and don't do that. But if you did, the worst thing that would happen is it would be converted to a loan at 1% and you'd have 5 years to pay it back. That is, you won't find any other line of credit at 1% unsecured. You just aren't going to find that. So it's definitely worthwhile to do that. And I also want to mention that of all the first round PPPs we originated last year, all but 17 have now already been forgiven. And those 17 are just because they haven't signed the paperwork yet. I don't really know why they're taking their time, but so that tells you that you will get this forgiven. Pretty much anything under 150,000 now is almost an automatic forgiveness. So I would say definitely take advantage of this, but don't wait, because if you wait, you really will miss out. And I'm not so certain there'll be another round.
Thank you. So we really are in a moment of transition and uncertainty, right? And so this question might seem a bit odd, but I would love your perspective, Donna, on what you're anticipating will happen over the next 6 to 12 months, particularly as we think about our sector at this time.
Yeah, I think we're what I was predicting, and we saw this along the way for almost every aspect of the pandemic, is that it went to the states to actually determine how things would happen in their own states for almost everything, from the vaccine, availability, to how we addressed the pandemic, right? And I think the American Rescue Plan money is exactly happening in that way. Money is being pushed to the states. And so what I predict now is that there's going to be an intense need for advocacy and public policy as it relates to how these monies flow from the federal government, to the state, to communities. And I think that we run the danger of having other people who are very disconnected, and I include myself in that too, because we're a statewide association. I do not do the work that Rhonda does every single day. So I need to be in contact with Rhonda to understand what her needs are, right? And we run the risk for people like me and people in the government and others who are not doing the work to actually make plans for this money that may not ever meet the needs that Rhonda and other nonprofits doing the work require. So I feel like I've got to eat my Wheaties, work out, drink smoothies, because it's going to be a real, I think, race as well as a long-term advocacy. Also, I'm thinking that we should be not just looking at the resource part of it, which matters. I'm not going to kid anyone. Money matters in this case, right? Because we have a lot of nonprofit organizations who really need those resources. I am hoping that there is an opportunity, though, to get organizations like Rhonda's across, the state who are doing work on the ground to engage from an advocacy perspective. If they never call their legislators, if they've never engaged in state agencies, directors, they've never done that. I hope that they will be engaged to make sure that resources, all kinds of resources, are made available to communities. And not only that they engage the communities that they serve, which is most important, right? So I see this, I see what's happening is that some will get money. We'll have to figure out how that money comes. We also are, I'm anticipating that foundations who've loosened their grip in terms of how monies can be used, I'm hoping that that goes the same way. I think many are going to commit to that. And I am seeing that there's this huge commitment as of late. I'm not sure how long, but I think it'll be about between now and in a few years out, a commitment to organizations either led by or serving race, people that are considered marginalized populations, or Black, Indigenous, and people of color leaders will also perhaps have access to newer programs that were designed as a result of this unearthed, emerging learning that and enlightenment that people have about what's really happening on the ground. So stay tuned.
Thank you. I know none of us are clairvoyant. It's so hard to predict what's coming down the pipeline, but I think you're spot on. Christy, what do you anticipate us seeing and what's going to be happening in the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, I absolutely agree with Donna. Everything she said, I believe, is completely spot on. A couple of other observations. I do think you're going to see a change in the way nonprofits do business. I think you're going to see a reduction in the physical footprint that we each have, which will be great for a lot of us because that will reduce our overhead expenses and we'll be able to put more of that hard-earned capital and hard-earned grant dollars to work in our communities. I think we're already starting to see that change. And with regard to the racial awakening that's happening in the country, that is going to be huge. This is not a single moment. This is a movement, and it's going to change the way we do business for the better for the long term. So I absolutely agree with her on those points. And I'm really hopeful that we're not stuck in this pandemic for a lot longer than we have been, because it's hard. We're going to be dealing with larger mental health issues. And unfortunately, the other side of that is nonprofits are going to be even busier than we've ever been because we always pick up the slack. We always do that. So I think we're going to have more to do.
Thank you. Rhonda, when you think about the long-term outlook for your organization as we move forward, what are some of the things that you think you'll need?
Money. I'll be honest. I mean, our program is unique in that it's in the schools. And so similar to what Christy said, we are rethinking of, how do we access girls who aren't in school, who are burnt out, Zoom burnout is real. And so for us, it I hate to say it, but it does come down to money, right? Like we need, in order to create some of these new virtual opportunities or to expand into neighborhoods versus the schools, we need the capital to do that. And so I do want to, celebrate those foundations and who are saying, hey, it's not programming, it's operational. Like use this how you need to use it, because the nonprofits are going to use it. Like, I mean, Donna, Christy, maybe you could tell me, I've never run into a leader who has used the money for not for their organization, right? So these kind of stipulations kind of stifle the work that we're doing. And specifically as a woman of color leading an organization, like it often feels like you're begging for money. And so, you know, by them being more free with the money, it makes you more comfortable. It makes you feel like, okay, I can't approach these foundations or these funders. And so I would hope, you know, money is a big thing for us because it's not only going to help us with programming, but again, to go back to it, you know, my staff is all women. They are women who are head of their household. They are single women. They are the caregivers, they're retired. And so I don't want to lose them. They're not going to be another statistic. And so if I can have money to keep them on staff, and not only that, provide them with benefits, health benefits during a health pandemic, I mean, it's a win-win for not only the organization, but for society as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Donna, Christy, as you think about the needs of nonprofits long-term, what else do we need besides money? We know money is top of the list, but are there other considerations, especially Christy, as you mentioned, that nonprofits in the coming years will be busier than ever and will be taking up much of the slack? Are there other things that we should consider around the long-term needs of nonprofits?
I think we're going to need people, dedicated people who are interested in doing work that has a personal reward, not just a monetary reward. And that's one of the things I'm very excited about, this new generation coming up behind us. They actually are interested in giving back, in making a difference, and doing something good in their community. So I think nonprofits are going to need to be, and leaders are going to have to start thinking about, how do we capture that talent and provide an outlet for that great energy so that we can really make even more difference in our communities than we have in the past. And I think things like being able to work offsite, work from home, the connectivity that we have now with some of these new, even though we do have Zoom fatigue, I think that's going to be great. And I think it's going to allow the nonprofit sector to really grow in ways that we haven't been able to do before. So that's what I see.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Christy. I really appreciate your earlier comment around the footprint, because I think that's something to watch even long term. There's going to be a lot of collaborations. I also think what you see and what Christy said she sees in terms of the talent, the younger talent, I'm super excited about that and fully agree. And I also see people saying, I've had it, like, I want to retire. This has really taken them over the edge. This has been confirmation for them that it's time for them to move on, right? So, and so there may be a leadership gap in terms of, did we do a good job preparing our next line leaders for leading the organization, right? I think we have to think about that. I also think that there is an opportunity for us to think about our partnerships and relationships in different ways. I see nonprofit leaders being bolder now with people who are funding them. While there was this kind of sense of, as Rhonda said it perfectly well, I feel like I was begging for money. Well, I think now these leaders are saying, wait a second, I am contributing to this community in a very meaningful way. And you're my peer. You just happen to be investing in the work and I happen to be doing the work. So those partnerships are going to the relationship, the realignment of those relationships. I think there's an opportunity to see a realignment, which means there may be lesser evidence of these power dynamics that nonprofits have always had to work through in trying to get things done and meeting that gap that Christy talked about. We always meet the gap. I think there's opportunity for us not only to meet the gap, because we'll do that, but to be recognized and acknowledged for that as legitimate organizations, legitimate businesses that are unique businesses, right? To get the work done. And so I see that there's going to be, I think this solidarity is what the word that comes to mind around nonprofits and really being able to speak truth to power and being able to kind of make a realignment for some of these systems that have not been serving us well in terms of how we are desiring, to serve our community. So I think it's going to be tough, but it's going to be so rewarding. And I do think that that footprint is going to be interesting, because I think that's going to be collaboration that derive from living together in terms of nonprofits saying, hey, we're aligned, let's get space, let's save money. because I think we're also going to be making different choice points in terms of how we spend our money behind this. So what Rhonda thought was frugal on her board, it's going to be super frugal, but super strategic, right? Super strategic in different ways and different choice points. So I suspect boards will actually be much more engaged with the operations, which could be good, maybe not so good, with the nonprofits that they're providing strategic leadership for.
Thank you for that. And Donna, I want to come back to one thing you mentioned around the leadership gap that we may find ourselves experiencing. So many folks during this time and even before the pandemic were burned out, right?
Yes.
And this exacerbated and accelerated that. And even as we are looking at younger talent who's energized and enthusiastic and coming into this work, we don't want them to burn out quickly, right? We don't want them to flame out. I'll start with you, Donna, and then I'd like Christy and Rhonda for you both to chime in on this. In your respective organizations, how are you addressing the mental health needs of your staff and thinking about burnout?
Yeah, it's evolving. When we first knew that this thing was going to be longer than a month or 30 days, we got someone in to talk to our staff. That was a risk for me because you don't know completely your staff's belief system. You don't know their lived experience. You only know what they've shared with you. And so it was a risk to figure out what would work, right? So we sent care packages throughout this pandemic. We've done things to convene each other outside, like virtual engagements, right? We did that. As I mentioned, we had a speaker to talk to us about joy, about what it meant to be, to really subscribe to joy in these moments. How do you find that? And so giving them tools for that. But to be honest with you, every single time we felt like, okay, we're in a good space, then it was people were working hard. And so I actually changed the way that our schedules are. They're flexible schedules. You work 40 hours a week. I don't care what days you work. I don't care how you break it up. Give the 40 hours, you manage your time. And just that notion of telling people you can manage your own time felt empowering. Now, some people still did what they were doing because that's what they were accustomed to. But many actually took advantage of being able to care for their loved ones in ways that they couldn't. People had children that were at home, and how do they navigate that? So I had to break away from that. But honestly, every time we do something, we feel like, yo, everybody's doing okay. Then it was what happened at the Capitol. Then it was, what happened to George Floyd a year ago, right? And then it was even the verdict that came through for Derek Chauvin. So these things were things I could not predict and put my arm around. So we've been opening up space, like on a Zoom, for people to come together. But I'm also thinking about, can we do meditation Mondays? Can we do things that we put into place that I've never thought about ever doing, just to be able to support, our colleagues? So more to come, but it's being fed by colleagues' needs, what they share with us, and trying to adapt to that and taking some risk, again, to make sure that I'm supporting.
Thank you. Rhonda, go ahead.
Yeah, I can hop in with this one. So my background is social work. So I've always been, mental health has always been something that's really been important to me. Now I have a smaller staff, and so a majority of them have always worked from home. So when the pandemic hit, it was, it wasn't as big of a transition for them. However, because they've always worked from home, now we're working from home nonstop. And often, I don't know about the rest of you, because your computer is downstairs in your living room, you're like, oh, I can go check that email real quick. 4 hours later, you're still there. Your kid's asking you what's for dinner. And you're like, oh, it's 10 p.m., right? And so that's just my own experience. But I say that to say, I asked my staff, I was like, what do you all need? We're a nonprofit. You've seen our budget. We don't have the money. We offered a health stipend because I wanted my staff to be able to, if you want to go get a COVID test, or if you want to go, just go see a mental health professional, you take this little stipend. It wasn't much. However, what they kept telling me time after time was, we need time. We have been running on fumes. Let us go. Let us breathe. And so at the end of May, when our season's over, now this is just the way our program works, is I'm closing the office. I'm actually taking the passwords to their emails, changing them, because what happens. We log in 5 minutes. I'll just be 2 weeks. Please don't even contact Girls on the Run. Like, our office is closed, and we will see. Now, let me say, this does come at a risk, right? We do have summer programming that we were thinking of doing, but we don't have it in us. And I'm not going to put out a program that is not quality, because it's just going to do us a disservice in the long run. So that's what we're doing. I haven't told my board yet, so if they're listening, FYI, this is what's happening.
Thank you, Rhonda. Christy, anything you want to share about what you guys are doing around mental health?
Well, we did, like everyone, we pivoted, right? I mean, our last day in the office was just before Friday the 13th in March of 2020. And we don't have a large team either, but we're spread amongst 3 offices in the state. So we have people that are based in Detroit, people based in Grand Rapids, and people based in Lansing. And we were used to coming together once a month in person to have an in-person staff meeting. And so we did a few things. First of all, we had to a pivot to a completely online platform, which was really, we weren't quite ready for that. So we were pushed into major organizational change at a time when everybody was experiencing huge upheaval in the world. So the first thing we did was we did close all of our offices, and then we said, we will deliver to you whatever equipment you need to do your job from home. So, and basically that just meant I had to bring somebody in who could pick up their equipment and take it to their house. So we said, if you need 2 monitors at home, we'll help you get 2 monitors. We can't get you a bigger house, but we can get you everything you need. We can send paper to your house. We can send pens to your house. I mean, any kind of office supplies that you might need. We did that. And then as the pandemic continued to wear on, we realized that this, I did institute a touch base, a weekly touch base on Tuesday mornings, the whole team. I said, please turn on your cameras. It's 8:30, in the morning, just for that one time you need to touch base. We need to see each other so that we can connect. And that's just a connection point. We moved our staff meetings to virtual, but last summer we did an outdoor picnic in a pavilion. We don't have a huge staff, so each staff member had their own picnic table. And, my assistant and I went ahead of time and we sprayed down every table with as much disinfectant as we could. We had lunch brought in, prepackaged for each individual person. We did a little raffle. Everybody had to wear a mask except when they were eating. It was a lot of fun, even though we had to do it within some pretty big constraints. I have a very mixed race staff, and the murder of George Floyd was a turning point. And I had staff members who were dealing with just full on anger. And how do you process that anger? And the board was dealing with that anger. And so we actually issued a justice statement, but then, one of our team members came to me and he said, that's not enough. We need to do more. So I said, what do you want to do? Well, that is going to be a big announcement for next month. So I can't talk about a whole lot of it right now, but I can tell you, we are going to officially launch the Justice Fund initiative in May, and it will be really geared for Black, Brown, Indigenous persons of color. It's going to be an amazing new thing. And so over the last year, we've been putting that together, developing that. And then at the end of the year, we close between the 24th and the 1st. And I really pushed people. I didn't take their passwords, but I said, don't read your email, just stop. And then this year, I discovered our underwriter analyst she didn't take a day off in January because she was processing PPPs. We were so worried they weren't going to get any time off or weren't going to get the money. So I gave her and the loan officer sort of an enforced spring break, if you will. It was a paid 3 days. Get out of here. Go. I don't care what you do. You can sit and watch TV, but you can't work. I need you to stop. And I'm actually going to probably do that again this summer. We're going to have a little in-service time where everybody just stops. The one monetary thing we did do, even though our budget was constrained, we added a $35 a month stipend to every staff member to help cover their internet expenses. Because last year was not a good year for us either financially. We also underwent a 25% reduction in force. So managing that on top of all the other stress, it's just been a whirlwind. I have to honestly say I've never had a year like 2020, and I hope to never have that again in my career. But I'm happy to say that our team, for the most part, has weathered this storm. They are resilient, and we talk about what's bothering us, and we bring our feelings out, and we make time for that. Even the least touchy-feely of our team members, they join us for those Tuesday morning team huddles, and And we're going to do another picnic. It's going to be outdoors. Everybody's going to have their own picnic table. I'm hoping most of us are vaccinated by then. We'll see how that goes. So we've also had to make adjustments. In some ways, I think that's made us even more empathetic as a nonprofit serving small businesses and those who don't have access to credit and nonprofits. So that's what we've done.
Thank you all. I think some of the things that you've implemented are not only admirable, but definitely some options and opportunities that other nonprofit organizations can think about as we all grapple with this new way of working, doing, and being. I wanted to just pose one more question before I get to audience questions. Donna, I want to come back to you and just, what are some of the things that should be top of mind for nonprofit leaders right now? What should they really be thinking about?
Yeah, I think they really should be thinking about what's happening now, but also while we can't predict the future, how can they actually think about the necessary steps to create a stronger future for them? And so don't stop your real-time strategic planning. I do think that, the way we used to do strategic planning is probably not the way, that should probably not be top of mind. It needs to be real time, it needs to be informed. And I think the other thing is making sure that your people are okay. So the Paycheck Protection Program protects their pay, but we heard all the reasons why we should be protecting them in other ways in terms of their mental health. And so we really, really need to have that top of mind. Our people are super, super important here, and they are our vehicle for getting our missions accomplished. I'll pass it on to my colleagues here.
Yep, Rhonda, Christy, anything that you want to add that you think nonprofit leaders should have top of mind at this time?
I think she's covered it. Rhonda, do you have anything?
Rhonda, you're muted.
I would just say self-care, like, you're only as strong, you can only give to your staff as much as you have. And so that's something I've really been thinking about, like, and they're gonna follow your lead. So if I say nobody work and I'm working, well, what's that gonna do, right? So just take care of yourselves and have grace for yourselves, because it's hard. It's really hard out here.
I mean, Rhonda, when you said that, it made me think of so many leaders who've been calling me, especially last year it started, where this was their first opportunity. You can even imagine this, their first opportunity leading a nonprofit as the executive director. And their first experience is through a pandemic,
Yep.
Right? You got your hand raised, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how are we caring for that? How do we keep people in the field who've had this kind of traumatic experience to want to continue to do that? We have to think about that.
Thank you. If there are any questions that you have in the audience, please drop them in the chat and we will be sure to get to them. I did have a few questions coming from the audience that I did want to pose. So I know we're talking about the PPP, but are there any other, and Christy, I'll pose this to you, are there any other funding opportunities that nonprofits should be thinking about other than the economic injury disaster loan and PPP that might be eligible for if they have less than 50 employees?
I really struggled with this. There were a lot of companies that were giving away free PPE items for their nonprofits and very small organizations. I know the EIDL advance is now closed. It's really difficult to find that kind of free, basically, or extremely low cost capital to provide those items. I actually would have to ask Donna if you know of anything through your network of providers working with nonprofits, if you had any ideas about that.
No, I don't. I know aside from the federal programs, as the EIDL, the PPP, there's also the employee credit too. That is something that is really used. And, as an employer, you have to pay these taxes, but if you can get them reduced, that also keeps money back to the organization. So we do have a resource page that I think that will be made available for more understanding on what there might be some others as well. And then I also want to say with there are a lot of nonprofits who don't have paid staff, but they have contracted staff. And as a contractor, you also can make available those funds too, which wasn't necessarily the case early on. So there's unique ways that you can assemble the people that are part of your organization that are 1099, for lack of a better word, or description rather, that can still provide resources for the mission of the work through that mechanism as well. Thank you.
And I think we may have gotten to this question, Christy, but I just wanted to offer it back up since it came from the audience. Is the forgiveness process the same as for the first round? And what is the loan amount threshold for automatic forgiveness?
It's actually very simple. The threshold is, I believe, 150 and under is pretty much automatic. There's very little you have to do. Some of our individuals we actually created the paperwork for our borrowers from round one. We sent it to them. We told them what we needed. They sent it back, they signed it, and they were done. We sent that in. So it's a very simple process, especially if you have a good relationship with your lender. It should not be that difficult. So I believe the threshold is 150 for automatic forgiveness with the round one draws. I don't think there's a difference within round two, and it is an easy process to go through.
Thank you. One more question in the chat. I also want to lift up a resource in the chat. The employee retention credit is something that folks should be thinking about, and we'll share the website for the COVID response resource page that we have. So, Christy, you talked about how quickly the resources for PPP were being depleted. Are you able to anticipate or even foresee a third round of funding?
That is a great question. There's so much federal money that's been put to use. I'm not certain we will see a third round. If we did, I would hope that they would do what they did with this one, and that is reserve the portal at first for very small organizations, including nonprofits, because we took advantage of that and we used put a lot of applications in early on that one. But the general consensus is we most likely will not see a third round. So get your application in right now if you can.
Thank you. And then one more question in the chat, Donna or Christy. Do we know when forgiveness will start for the second draw?
Forgiveness starts after you've used the funding. So if you've used all of the funding that you got in your second round draw, you are eligible to begin submission for forgiveness. In general, you should probably be 8 to 10 weeks because you are looking at 2.5 times payroll. So when you get to the 10-week mark, don't hesitate, contact your lender and get things moving, because the sooner you get that forgiven, the more of a relief it is for you and the better it is for your balance sheet, because then it goes from being a loan, a forgivable loan, but a loan, then you can reclassify that as a grant. And so hopefully you'll want to do that sooner rather than later. So I would say 8 weeks as the shortest time frame.
Got it. Thank you. I think that wraps up our questions from the audience. Ladies, I want to thank you so much for joining us today to help demystify PPP. We know that it's been a bit confusing and challenging for nonprofits to navigate this process, and you've shared so much insight and perspective here that I think folks will be able to really kind of move forward if they decide to apply, and apply soon. Apply soon. As Christy mentioned, the funds are dwindling quickly. I also want to thank the Co.act Detroit and Michigan Nonprofit Association team for all of your hard work, dedication, and energy to putting together not only this webinar, but previous webinars as well, just trying to ensure that our nonprofit community can connect to these resources. Our team will be sending out a follow-up email coming out of this session that will not only include a survey, which you can also find in the chat, but also a recording of this webinar and an opportunity to connect to previous PPP workshops that we've had as well. In addition, we'll include our website at Co.act Detroit, where you can sign up for one-on-one technical assistance for assistance with your application and also with the forgiveness process. Again, thank you all for joining us today. And we look forward to continuing to interact with you, engage with you as we keep moving forward to serve our community. Thank you.
Thank you so much.